Hello everybody, I'm here to introduce Adobe Illustrator to you and go over the Artboard 1 for 10.3a, Technical Skills Part 1, so you could learn the basics of this program. So we're going to start with downloading this file. So I'm going to just click download. It's going to be in my downloads. And then you guys should make a folder for Illustrator and then a folder for Technical Skills, because there'll be this assignment here, 10.3, but there'll also be Part 2 and 3, maybe even a Part 4. I don't know. We'll see. So I've downloaded it. I've already made my folders. And then I would go to Adobe Illustrator. So again, making folders, just make sure you're using OneDrive, right? And then you would go to this year's class. And then you would go to Illustrator. And I've got my tech skills projects here. And then this is where I would open it from. And so I'm going to go to Illustrator and go File, Open. And you should see that Illustrator, this interface looks pretty much the same as Photoshop. So everything's the same. So if you get a question on the exam, like create a new file with a print preset, you would do the same thing, click new file, and then it should look exactly the same as Photoshop. But we already have a file in place, so I'm going to go to File, Open. And I just downloaded it, and I didn't move it, so I'm going to go to my downloads and just open it. And then with the file open, you'll see that Illustrator looks pretty similar also. Just taking a second here. So I have my tools on this side. I've got my artboards on here. So you have 4 artboards here. I've got my other tools, or my panels over here, my properties panel. And then the first thing I want to do though is, so you're looking at the same thing that I'm looking at, I'm going to go to my workspaces up in the corner here and go to Essentials Classic. And I'm just going to reset Essentials Classic in case I did any changes here. So there we go. So first step is to go to Workspaces, Essentials Classic. And just like Photoshop, if I want to save the workspace, I would go to New Workspace and then give it a name and save it. And you should, again, there's lots of similarities here. I've got an options bar, toolbar, panels. You could see if I go to my layers panel, this looks a lot different. Layers are used quite differently. They're not as important, like in Photoshop you live on the layers panel because you're dealing with pixels, right? Here I'm dealing with shapes, right? So you can see all these shapes that I have here. And the main thing I'm using layers for is kind of organizing things and grouping things together. And so like everything that you see here is on the template layer, so I just lock that. And you can see I could unlock that, or I could hide everything just to see. If I want to see what's on this layer, I could hide it. And another thing, I could click down here, and so layers are just basically a group of objects. So I could go in and I could even, if this is unlocked, oh, that was the hidden layer. If this is unlocked, I could even go in and kind of select the different things by clicking on their layer. So layers are kind of itemized groups stuff together. And you can see this is blue, so anything on a blue layer would be selected using blue. And if you have a really large file with lots of different shapes, that color coding helps a lot. So if I went to layer 1 and I just created a shape here, you could see that it's selected with red, right? I'm going to delete that. All right. And that's basically the layers. You can see you don't group anything here. I would go up to Object or Control G to group and ungroup, Control Shift G to ungroup. But we're going to be working on Artboard 1, and we're going to try to do what it says here on this Canvas page. So we already started by discussing the similarities between Photoshop and Illustrator, and showing the rulers and ending a guide at the fringe edge of the square. Okay, so we're going to make sure that this is locked, right? So template layer needs to be locked, otherwise this is going to be really hard. And you can see these artboards are not made of pixels. These are like coordinate planes, X and Y values. And if I zoom in here, I'm going to press Z, just like in Photoshop, and zoom in on the square. And I'm just going to temporarily unlock this. Don't do this at home. And I'm going to use a selection tool, and then I'm going to select these, and these are grouped together. If I use the direct selection tool, you could see this square here is made up of 4 anchor points, and they all have X and Y values. You could see the X and Y values here, right? If I clicked on it, I could see those in my properties panel, the X and Y values here. 4 points and 4 anchor points and 4 line segments. Okay, so I'm going to lock the template layer again and go to layer 2. And guides work the same as in Photoshop. well, you could create them the same way. They work much differently. So like if I click and drag, I could pull a guide out of the ruler. And then smart guides are going to tell me, see how it's lined up with the path, right? So I have this lined up with the path. And you can see that it turned red because it is selected. It's on the red layer. So if I click off, I have a selection tool. If I click off, you can see that it's blue. It looks like a normal guide. So in Photoshop, these guides don't move, and you have to like erase them all at once. But I could click and drag and select this guide and then delete it, right? So that's how guides work. And this program, like Photoshop, is more of an artistic program where you're editing the colors of pixels, and you could brush and paint and things like that. Where Illustrator is more of a building program, like you're building logos, you're building ads, and things need to be very, very, very specific, because all logos that you create need to be scalable. So if there's one tiny little error, the whole thing, and then I blow that up, that tiny little error becomes huge, right? So it's very important that you're using precision and detail when using Illustrator, where Photoshop, that's less important. Okay, so the first tool that we're going to mess with is the shape tool. So now if I click and hold, I could see all the different shape tools. But what I could also do is click on this outside arrow, and that allows me to pull all these tools out into their own little panel and toolbox. And then this works the same as in Photoshop with the vector tools that used to be at the bottom. This is now at the top, right? Now, smart guides, again, because this is such a precision program, smart guides become very, very important. So you can see like smart guides are telling me when I move them around the mouse, like I'm at the center point, or these are like I'm at a path, I'm at an anchor point. So if I click on this anchor point, if I want to replicate this square exactly, and I can't touch the actual square because it's on a locked layer, but I'm on a layer that's not locked, and I'm going to wait till I can find the anchor point, then click and drag, and then move to the other anchor point. Now I've exactly created that. And another thing I could do to create a rectangle is I could just click once with the mouse, and then it's going to ask me what do you want to make there? I want to make a 1.25 inch by 1.25 inch rectangle, and then I hit OK, and there it is, right? And you can see this one is actually transparent, or both of them are. You see if I click and drag and select them both, you can see they're still there. They just don't have a stroke and a fill. So that's something that was similar to Photoshop, where like there was a foreground and a background color, and that's basically the color of pixels. So in this program, we're not coloring pixels, we're adding a stroke and a fill to shapes. And you can see if I zoom out all the way, I'm going to press Z and then click and drag with the mouse and hold the space bar to move around. So you see all artboards. I could show you what this file is really made up of. I could go to the view, and I could change the view to outline mode. And you could see this is what this file is made up of, a bunch of paths and a bunch of points, right? And if I slide over, you can see this is how I made one of the clouds we're going to learn later on. A bunch of ellipses and a rectangle, right? And I made this cloud. All right, so I'm going to leave outline mode. So if your computer looks like this, you're in outline mode. That's really easy to change. Just go up to view and change it to GPU or CPU preview. Now I'm back to normal. But I want to see these rectangles. So first of all, I'm going to click and drag and delete this one here. But I want to select this one, and I want to have the default stroke and fill. So that's where I would click right here in the corner here, and that gives me a white fill with a black 1-point stroke. Now if I want to change the colors, I can double click on this, and then I'll get my color picker just like in Photoshop, and I can change it to whatever color I want. You can see I was changing the fill. If I want to change the stroke, I would have to click on the stroke so it's in front. So whichever one is in front, that's the one you're going to be editing with different panels and things. And then if I press the X key on the keyboard, it switches them back and forth. So I use the X key a lot when I'm trying to change stroke and fill. And then for the stroke, I could also change the point size up here or on the stroke panel. All right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to talk about the selection tools really quick. So I've been referring to selecting it like there's two selection tools. Selections are very different in Illustrator because you're selecting points and paths, not different pixels that are colored differently. So the selection tool allows me to select entire objects, right? So I click off, I click on, I've selected that whole object. I could do that because there is a fill. If I went here and I changed this to no fill, now like I can't click on it in here because there's nothing there. I would have to click on the edge, right? And you can see it kind of looks like free transform in Photoshop. I'm going to give this back to default stroke and fill. Because there is no free transform, because like I could just always change this around, right? I'm going to hit Control Z to undo that. Now this other selection tool is the direct selection tool. Now if I click on this tool, you can see how it doesn't look like free transform anymore. This is how you select individual parts. So I could click on this one anchor point. I zoom in. I don't know if that's going to help. You can see that this is selected and these are not filled in. You might not be able to see this that well, but if you try it on your screen, you'll be able to see like this is selected and these points are not selected. So I've selected an anchor point. And so there's two types of anchor points. I'll get into that in just a second. I'm going to go back to the selection tool and select this rectangle to talk very briefly about the options bar. So in Photoshop, the options bar was relative to what tool you used. It's kind of the same in Illustrator, but also it's relative to what you have selected. So like right now you see I have a rectangle selected. It says rectangle. These are all the different things I could do to the rectangle. Where if I go to the direct selection tool or press the A key on the keyboard and click on one single point, you could see that now these are all the different options for a specific anchor point. And there are smooth anchor points and corner points. Corner points, you can see these are all four of these are corner points because the path changes direction when it hits the corner. Now, I could convert these back and forth. This is convert to a corner point. This is convert to a smooth point. So if I take one of these here and I just convert it to a smooth anchor point, you could see all of a sudden it has handles. So I could grab this handle and kind of twist this around however I want, right? Because now it is a corner point, a smooth point, which means that this path does not change direction when it passes through the anchor point. So you got smooth and corner points. All right, so the goal here is to recreate these three shapes. So I'm not going to hit Control-C, Control-V a lot here in Illustrator. I might do that sometimes because I could go to Edit and paste in place or paste in back or things like that. This might be helpful. But most of the time, when I have an object selected with the selection tool, if I move this around, but I also hold the Alt key, I'm suddenly copying. See, I could like copy this, just clicking and dragging. I'm going to do that. But also if I hold the Alt and the Shift key, now it's suddenly, I'm moving it at 90 degrees and 45 degree angles. It's locking it. So now I could easily slide this over and line up the lines. And smart guides are telling me that that is lined up. So then I'm going to let go of the mouse and then Alt and Shift. And now to recreate this shape, all I need to do is convert these 2 points into smooth anchor points. So I'm going to click on the direct selection tool and then click on this anchor point and convert it to a smooth point, and then click on this anchor point and convert it to a smooth anchor point. And then we've got these two shapes recreated. All right, moving right along here. Then we're going to talk about circles. So I've got these two shapes. I can Alt drag, but now to create this circle, again I would use the ellipse tool, just like in Photoshop here. But it might be kind of hard to like recreate this because I'm always starting from the top left of whatever shape here when I'm creating it. I could hold Shift. That allows me to create a perfect circle, and that's pretty close to what I wanted. That's one way to do it. I'm going to delete that. Another way is to find the center point. So you have the center point. I'm just going to click and drag. Now if I hold Shift, it allows me to create a perfect circle. But if I also hold Alt, you can see how I could make this shape from the center point. And that'll allow me to make that exactly the way it is, right? So now I have these three shapes. And now the last thing we're going to do here with these three shapes is add strokes and fills in different colors. So there's lots of different ways to add different colors, but we're going to talk about using two different panels. So like the little Bob Ross color palette here, this is the color panel. So since I have the fill in front, now wherever I click here, it's going to fill whatever I have selected with that color. And then if I move to select the stroke in front, I could do the same thing. Select whatever color, which you can't really see right now because it's a really 1 point thin stroke here. So I'm going to go to the stroke panel or right up here on the options bar and make the stroke a little bit bigger. So again, I'm not really changing the actual shape. I'm just changing like how the shape is dressed up. And now that you can see that, now I'm going to go to the swatches panel. And this is where this looks a little different than Photoshop. I'm going to hold spacebar to move this a little. This is where I can change these colors just by clicking on swatches. And if I really like this green that I made with using the color picker, like double clicking, and I found like, ooh, I love this shade of green, I can just click and drag this over to the swatches and add it to my swatches, right? And now I could use that in this document only. All right, so then now I'm going to just add different colors for each of these. I'm just going to make this blue. And this is the stroke. Make this a little bigger. And we'll hit X, and we'll give it this color fill. And we'll select this. We'll give that a gradient fill, maybe. And then hit X, so now I'm in the stroke. And I'm going to give this a yellow stroke there. All right, so I have these three things here. And then the rest of these shapes are pretty, like we've got a rounded rectangle, the rectangle tool, ellipse tool, making polygons. So with the polygon tool, when I click and drag, when I use the up and down arrow keys, that's how I could add more sides, and then shift allows me to lock it into place, right? So I'm going to delete that. The star tool, though, is slightly different. So I'm going to slide over a little bit here. And now when I click and drag, now I'm in the creation mode of the star, right? So like I have not let go of my mouse. Now if you use the up and down arrow keys, I can add more points to the star. If I hold the control key, I could change how the star looks. So what I'm doing now is I'm changing the distance between the two radiuses. So you can see if I let go, I've created that star. And there's a circle right in here. You can see how, like, what that circle looks like, and then there's a circle out here. So like holding control allows you to change that star. So you could play with the star tool, and you could pretty much go like an infinite amount of points on the star. But I'm going to delete that one. And what we're looking for in the assignment is that you created a 10-point star and put it right in the middle of this shape here. So to do that, I'm going to use the star tool, but instead of clicking and dragging to create it, I'm just going to click once. And that gives me the option to change the two radiuses and then change the points. So we need a 10-point star, and I'm going to give this a 0.75 outside radius and a 0.5 inside radius. I'm going to hit OK. And there I go. There's my star that's inside. I could grab the edge and hold Shift and Alt, and that allows me to change the size from the center point too if I want to fit this in perfectly, but it needs to fit inside the star like so. And that's about it for artboard 1. There's actually one more thing I'm going to show you, and that's adding, to make these look even better, I could add different strokes to them. So like I'm going to press V for the selection tool. I could click on this square. You see how like it has a yellow line stroke that's kind of boring. Up in my options bar, I could change the way the stroke looks. Now if I make this bigger, you can see it better. And then maybe you don't want it to be yellow. Red, it's going to pop out there. You can see how like it changes, it starts here and then it bloats and gets smaller again. Or you could have this look like this, and that looks kind of interesting, right? Another thing you can do is change this, it's just a solid line here. Like now I could add, make it look like charcoal or something like that. And then the cool thing about Illustrator is that if I click on the little library menu here, there are tons and tons of different libraries of brushes. So if I go to Vector Packs, for example, Grunge, and these are all just standard with Illustrator, you can see all these different brushes here. And I'm going to go to the circle, and I'm going to add this to the circle right now. That's really, really big, so I need to shrink the brush size down a little bit. Then you can play around with the brushes and change these around. So I'm going to add this one, maybe we'll give it this, right? And that looks really crazy, so maybe not that one. Maybe this one here. That one's also really crazy because there's a lot of points here, so I make that a little smaller. 0.25, if you want to go smaller than that, you have to enter in the specifics. So I'm going to put in 0.1 and hit Tab. And then you can see that I've got a nice little stroke on that. All right, and that's it for artboard 1. So we're going to stop the video there, and yeah, hope this helped you understand Illustrator, and stay tuned for artboard 2 video.